A life of greatness to me is a life of service. I believe that we're here on this earth to learn and then to share our learnings with others and to be able to help others on their journey. I think that is an important part of creating a life of greatness. I think a life of greatness is also a life filled with love, not fear.
G'day. Welcome back to another episode of A Lot to Talk About. It is your boy, the captain of the ship, the man in charge, Bradley J. Dryborough. Of course, you can call me Brad. And I'm so excited to be here. I'm always excited. I feel like I say that at the start of every show. But today feels like an incredible privilege for me because I'm sitting across from someone who is what you would call a peer. You know, she's a podcast host. She's within the industry, but she's definitely for me like the master, you know. She's like the Mr. Miyagi of podcasts in Australia that I feel like, or the Mrs. Miyagi in this case, that I get to learn from, I get to absorb from. And the beautiful thing is that whilst I get to do all of that throughout the course of today's episode, you as a listener or the viewer do too, because she's an incredible human being with such a powerful story and this ability to teach and cut through that is inspiring. And I just get so much from listening to this lovely human being, and I'm going to give her the introduction she deserves. So she is the creator and host of a podcast called A Life of Greatness, and we're going to dive into all of that here today. She's interviewed some of the most amazing people in the world, people who I look up to and aspire to be like, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce from your home, your car, or wherever you are, get ready to give a very warm welcome to the one, the only Mrs. Sarah Grynberg.
Bless you, Bradley.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Like we spoke before, I'm so excited for this because I really want to dive into your story and hear about how all of this has come together.
Amazing. I'm excited as well.
So you're so lovely to give me your time, and I guess I want to kick it off from the top. I know you're not a surface level person. You're a deep thinker and a deep conversationalist. And the name of your podcast, A Life of Greatness, I guess we'll kick it off with that. What does a life of greatness mean to you?
So a life of greatness to me has changed over the years, and I think probably most people's answer would change as you go through your life. But some of the things that really I think will always stay the same are a life of greatness to me is a life of service. I believe that we're here on this earth to learn and then to share our learnings with others and to be able to help others on their journey. I think that is an important part of creating a life of greatness. I think a life of greatness is also a life filled with love, not fear, and about appreciating all the people around you and not taking any day for granted and knowing that things can change in an instant in life and to be appreciative of what we have around us. I mean, to me, really, that is a life of greatness.
That's a beautiful way of describing it. And I connect with so much of that there. I love what you said about service to others. It's a conversation I just had this morning, actually. I tend to talk about purpose a lot, and I've been very blessed to have a group of amazing friends in my life who are very open to that conversation, because I know for a lot of people it can be daunting. It's intimidating to talk about really deep things like purpose because it makes you get reflective. It makes you think about the life that you're living, and sometimes that's uncomfortable. And, one thing that I've, as you, I guess, can relate to and really speak on is when you're a podcast host and you get to connect with amazing people, when you hear them talk about their purpose and their paths in life or their reasons, their whys, it always comes back to service of others. I think eventually people figure out that you'll always get more fulfillment out of doing things that help other people and have a greater impact than you will in selfish endeavours. It's definitely something I've learned over the course of the last 2 years of my life. And I'm always interested by, for me, I always wanted to help people. I always wanted to have an impact in the world. But I think going on the journey and sort of stepping into fear and having a bit of courage to go after the things I wanted to in life reaffirmed exactly how that looked for me.
Yes.
I've heard your story and, you went from the corporate world producing and, being in that radio space to then coming into podcast. Coming into this journey and connecting with people and sharing story, did that reaffirm what your purpose was and what your why was? Or did you feel like you had a grip on it beforehand?
Well, no, I definitely did not have a grip on it beforehand. And I think for a lot of my life, I didn't even really think about this world because it wasn't there. And I think as a lot of us do, we go through that dark night of the soul to be able to then rise and realize that there's more to life than material items or the superficial, which there's, no problem that people might lead their life with that just till the day that they depart. But at the same time, to be able to be more conscious of everything we do, I feel enables us to be able to live the greatest life. And I think for me, even though from a young age I was always had an interest in spirituality and the world that we can't see, as well as philosophies on life. I always like things like that and having those deep and meaningful discussions. I wasn't aware that we really had a say in our life and that we could be the creators of our life. None of that was on my radar. And then, as you mentioned, when I was in a radio role many years ago, that was exhausting because it was the breakfast radio role, and it was like early mornings, and I had 2 young kids at the time, and it broke me really. And it was in that moment that I realized that only I could help myself and only I could get out of this. And it was, I think a lot of the time when we go through those dark nights, our ego moves to the side and we want to know that there's more to life than what is around us. And that drove me to then dive into all these self-improvement books, as well as meet a mentor who would guide me on a lot of the spiritual principles. And then one thing I started doing was really embodying what I was learning. So not only was I learning it philosophically, but I was actually doing it in my everyday life. And I understood the power of words and our thought patterns, and I would start changing my thought patterns, and I would be very conscious of the words that I was speaking. And by doing all of that, I noticed that things in my life in a very short period of time started to shift. And I found that a really amazing thing, because it was like, the universe or source or whatever you want to call it was giving me instantaneous feedback almost. And I realized, oh my God, like this really works and my life seems more fulfilling. And as I traveled on that path, I started to immerse myself in research around why some people seem to be happier than others. Like, why were some people that didn't have material items and didn't have great wealth some of the happiest people I know, and then some of the biggest entertainers that I would be around were miserable, when you on the surface level you would think that they had it all. And that got me into studying different philosophers and scientists and doctors, and understanding why some people found it easier to be happier than others, and what did true happiness mean. And really it came to what I said a life of greatness is, which is about service and being connected to family and your loved ones, and living a life that with intention and consciousness and, all that kind of thing. That was what was making a lot of people happy. And I think for me, I then had an idea. I moved into the podcasting space about a year after I did that a year from doing the breakfast radio show, and I started producing some of the biggest podcasts in Australia. And then I had this idea for a life of greatness, which was so unbelievably organic. It wasn't something where for 2 years I was thinking, God, I'm going to do this podcast. It was literally like, things in my life seem to be really shifting. This information that I'm learning is so unbelievably fascinating. I need to allow others to be able to learn what I have learned, so then I can enrich their lives. And that's when the service part came into it. And I started doing this podcast, and it just skyrocketed. And you know what as well? There was not one iota of me that thought that it never would. Like, I always knew that the podcast would do well. And it has, and it has been such a labor of love for me. And then to be able to give that to other people has just been so enriching. And then obviously I do a lot of writing, and then also keynote speaking and heaps of other different things. So it's fulfilled my life in a way that I never thought it would. But at the same time, from a young age, from when I was about 4, I also really liked entertainment, and I wanted to be an actress for many years. And I did entertainment PR when I finished uni and all this other stuff. So I think I kind of manifested it without even realizing what that word meant. So I landed where I wanted to be, and I always loved 60 Minutes, and I was always very interested in conversations with people. So it's almost natural that I got to where I was without even meaning to.
I love that. And, I hear something a lot in the podcast space, and it's listen more than you speak. And let me tell you, it's bloody easy when you're the guest, because just listening to you talk about these philosophies and ideas and parts of your journey. It's so nice to listen to. And probably the main thing that stood out to me there, or there were many things, but the one I really want to go to first is you spoke about, learning these things in theory, but then understanding the power of putting it to practice. You also touched on something at the beginning of that conversation there where you spoke about like sort of hitting that dark spot of your life and what that teaches you about what you actually want. And I find that, in the areas that we haven't learnt the theory yet, it almost takes that rock bottom to teach us what we want and where we don't want to be. But when we're learning the theory and we're putting it into practice, how important is that action to make sure that it actually cements in who we are as human beings and what we want from our life? Because I feel like often we can sit and listen and hear. And like I said at the start, I've been very blessed to learn off some incredible people on the podcast. But it often takes going through the struggle of that action to really cement how that's going to work for you and how that's going to change your direction.
Oh, absolutely. I think, for example, you obviously have cystic fibrosis, so assuming that every day for you is a blessing, like not that there's anything wrong with you, it's not like you're leaving us, but in the sense of you appreciate it because you have something that doesn't make your health 100%, right? Mm. But it's not till sometimes some of us have that instance or are faced with a diagnosis from a family member or ourselves where we go, holy hell, life is not forever. And even though we know that in theory, when we're actually faced with something that shows us that it isn't, it's when our lives are frantically shaken and we have the ability then to make changes. Do we make them forever after, hopefully? Or do we just make them for that instance and go back, if things then settle, go back to the way that they were? And I feel that hopefully we wouldn't do that. And I know for myself, when I had that time where, I was doing the breakfast radio job, and actually the story goes where I got the flu and I was so unwell and I was too scared to not go to the job. So I went to the job that day. This is pre-COVID days. And I was sick, and I remember just coming home and feeling so overwhelmed and exhausted and thinking there must be more to life than this. And in that instance, making the move to want to change my life. But when I changed it, I went all in. And like I said, I started embodying what I was learning and all that kind of stuff. But the thing is, I haven't changed since then, in the sense of, yes, sometimes we need to watch our thought patterns more and things will happen and it'll unsettle us. But I have gone on the journey to be the best possible person that I can be since that occasion. And I think it's a big learning for all of us to, if we're faced with something that is not ideal and is that, dark night of a soul or whatever it is, to use that as a catapult for change, but, change properly and do it for the better of everyone around you as well as yourself. And I think that's a really important lesson that we could all hear.
I couldn't agree with that more. It's funny what you said there about we recognize these things, we learn them, and sometimes we get comfortable and like the challenge or the adversity of the moment isn't present anymore. We kind of fall back into the person we were, because I really relate with that. Like I was probably noticing, I think we spoke about a pre-ramble before I hit record. And the first 18 years of my life were incredibly healthy. And whilst I was very positive and I felt very blessed for the life I was living, it's easy to do that when there's not actually that much adversity. Like on paper, I had all of these medical conditions and things I was trying to solve, but they weren't actually presenting huge problems. When I turned 18, my first real scare with my health was, coughing up copious amounts of blood and being on my way to emergency thinking I was dying. And, I remember I was speaking about it on stage recently. I was speaking at a pharmaceutical conference and I spoke about that moment and how vividly I can remember that moment. And it's almost imprinted in my brain, frame by frame, of driving to the hospital and having my old man beside me in the car and thinking, far out, is he going to watch me pass? Is he going to watch me not make it to the hospital? And, how is he going to live with that grief for the rest of his life? I remember calling my mum and my sister, who worked at the same place of employment at the time, and saying, hey, look, I don't know what's happening, but I'm coughing up a lot of blood. You need to meet us at emergency. And in my head, trying to process whether I was ever going to see them and feel connected to them again. And in the moment, that wakes you up. It's like
Oh,
dunking your head in a bucket of ice water. You feel alive and you feel so presently aware of what is important, what is not, and who you are as a human.
yeah.
And
it's interesting as well. Like, there's a term, and I actually forget what it is, but it's like that moment is like a snapshot in your mind, because there is a psychological term for when something very traumatic happens, we do not forget it. It's the same as something really great happens. You remember exactly where you were, exactly how you felt. It's like you can take in every color that was around you. And what I also find is interesting is also, I don't know about for you, but when I've been in a circumstance where I've heard information that really upset me and shook me, but this is like, life-threatening sort of stuff, you just hear your breath. Like, I remember hearing the sound of my breath, and it's like every sense that we have was just heightened. I remember in that instance for me, I was looking around and it was like sound was so loud and the colors were so bright, and it's like time just stopped and it was like slow motion. The body and the mind does interesting things when it goes into that kind of shock sensation.
It is so incredible how much impact it has on you and how that impact is lasting. And what you said there about seeing that snapshot so clearly and it not leaving your imagination, it's like putting your handprint in soft cement, and it hardens and it's there forever. You always remember that memory, that moment in time, and it's very present with you for a couple of weeks, even months, and then all of a sudden things start to settle again and you kind of fall back into the same trap of, we're just going about the life you are living because things are okay. And I sort of had that over the course of a couple of years. It was like every year there was another health crisis and another reason to be even more grateful for the present moment, remembering that tomorrow is not promised, or all of these lessons and things that we're told and taught by so many people who have lived those experiences. And I remember one of them being so significant. I had this, it's weird, a lot of people don't like hospitals. I love hospitals because I think I've had such amazing experiences with the staff within them and the people within them. And I remember being around 23, 24, and I was probably more like 22 at the time, and I was sitting in hospital for 2 weeks. I had quite a severe lung infection, and there was this man that I met in the hallway. His name was Ernie, and he was probably in his 60s. And my mum had actually sold Ernie a car before, and, I'd bumped into the hallway, into him in the hallway with my mum, and she'd introduced me, and he was staying in the room next to me. And his room was full of a bunch of old gents, and, so there was never a moment of quiet and peace. And I had a private room because of my CF, and I remember just saying to Ernie, mate, if you ever want to come around for a yarn, come around for a yarn. And every day at 2:00, the tea and biscuit cart would come around, and I'd get my black tea and a couple of bickies, and I know Ernie would be next, and as soon as he got his, he'd walk into my room and we'd share a cup of tea together and have a chat. And Ernie was unfortunately terminally ill, and he wasn't going to make it. But I remember sitting there with Ernie and being really aware of that, but having these conversations every day, and none of it was about materialism. None of it was about regretting the things he did. It was all about regretting the things he didn't have an opportunity to do, the moments in his life that he remembered because they were rich with incredible people, with incredible experience, and taking pride in the things that he really loved in life. And that lesson and those conversations and those cup of teas definitely cemented within my brain as quite a positive experience, because I remember standing at his funeral and thinking, far out, everything that we spoke about are all of the things that I feel like I'm not living up to right now in my life. And, it took another one or two experiences before, for me, I decided to make a real change, and that real change has been the last 2.5 years. And the fulfillment and the happiness I've gained from living those lessons has been the most incredible journey, and something I'm just so excited for what they'll continue to build in the direction of my life for these years to come. But I feel like as humans, we always regret the things that we don't do and the decisions we don't make for ourselves, but also for the betterment of the people around us. For you, what was sort of the flip of the switch? Like, when did you decide to really put this into action and put this into practice? Was it leaving that job and being given the opportunity to dive into the podcast space?
Well, it was definitely that job. That was when I was, what I mentioned before about when I had the flu, and then I came home and I was like, oh God, this is just not for me. And then when I was given the job in the podcasting space, which was at the same radio station, which I still work at, I realized that, like I said, I was being shown the fruits of my labor of doing meditation, of manifestation, of changing my thought patterns, of being very careful about the words I was speaking. And when I was shown that, when you're shown feedback straight away, then you then want to go and keep doing it and keep doing it. It's like when you start doing manifestation, you see your manifestations start occurring. You're like, oh my God, this works. And you keep wanting to do it because you want to create good things in your life. And I think from then it just became a way of life. And I don't know anything else now. And like anything, the more that you start doing something, the more that it kind of becomes embedded in you and who you are as a person. And, don't get me wrong, I still like talking to my girlfriends about the more mundane things that are in news.com or Daily Mail here and there, but they definitely don't make up a huge percentage of my conversations with people. And I think, when you go into this realm, you naturally, when you change as a person, you end up attracting those different types of people who are more like you into your life. As you do if you're a low vibrational person, you'll start attracting that stuff into your life as well. And so I've been very blessed to have some amazing friends, to meet great people through this work and have these fabulous conversations. And that really is what drives me to keep going and keep bettering myself and keep helping others.
That's a really interesting point, because I feel very blessed that all of them, like I've been very close with a lot of my mates for a long time. And there's plenty of mates I've made in the last 2 years who I've met through different experiences. A lot of those mates who I met through running. Running's been a big part of my life for the last 2 years. But I've got this really amazing friendship with so many of them where we can still be banterful and we can still have a great laugh and talk about all the things we've always talked about. But I feel like being open and being able to have really honest, vulnerable conversations with all of those mates has led to, I guess, all of us challenging in a healthy way and encouraging each other to be more open to growth all the time. I'm really interested as to what you said there about this evolving nature of who we all become as human beings and what we're trying to become. Learning all of these things theoretically and then applying them to your life and practice. Were you ever challenged by the people in your life who felt like maybe you were changing? Because change can be associated so negatively, but it's a great thing if you're evolving in the right direction.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, if none of us were changing, then that would be, life to me, the whole idea of life is coming here to learn and, better ourselves and all that kind of stuff. So I think if you're always staying stagnant as a person, you would just not be growing, and then life could seem quite mundane. But yeah, I think definitely when you change as a person, you might let go of a few people or move further away from people that maybe aren't on the same path as you, or even if they're not on the same path, they might not appreciate who you're becoming. And that's absolutely okay, because I said you'll start attracting the right people into your life as well, that people that are interested in what you're doing or interested in the kinds of conversations that you want to have. And that opens you up to be a richer person anyway. So, most of the friends I have are friends that I've had for many years, but then at the same time, I have made some beautiful new friends as well who I absolutely adore. And really, as we grow older, I feel that like your group of friends becomes smaller and smaller anyway, because you don't have as much time. And it's better to put a lot of time into, or as much time as you can, into a smaller group where it's rich and it's, you're having these one-on-one conversations about life that have so much meaning in them, than, having a lot of friends, but really not spending much quality time with any of them, or having these really beautiful in-depth discussions with them. So yeah, I think, when you change, you find your people. It's natural.
Definitely. And, one thing I hear a lot of people, especially on podcasts, say, and I'm always challenged by this idea, is that the more people you meet, the more friends you have, the more you realise you can only manage so many great friendships. Is that something that you've had to be wary of? Because you have met some incredible people, and you can genuinely hear when you interview someone the way that those connections become more than just a guest on your podcast. They end up becoming a friend, and I've been able to have that first-hand experience too with so many of the incredible people I chat to. But sometimes you think, far out, I've got such a network of people, it can be hard to manage all of those relationships. Do you tend to focus on a few, or do you try to divide your time between everyone in your network now?
Well, to be honest with you, I have 3 best friends who I've known one for 15 years, one for about, 20, the other one for, say, 10 years, I think. And they're my 3 closest friends, and I adore them. And then I have a circle outside of that who I also really adore. And they're the closest people in my life. I mean, people I meet on the podcast, I really like, but some will become my friends, some not. But to me, those people that I just spoke about, they're like my closest friends and the ones I put time into and the ones that I'm fulfilled by. And other people that come along are great also. But yeah, like I said, we're a very busy person like you are. So you only have time to be able to give your time to that many people. And so, yeah, I have a great wide network of people, but I don't give myself to a lot of people, if that makes sense, because I also am a very private person to some degree. And, I share with the people that are close to me. And I've always quite enjoyed just having that.
I love the nature of podcasts, ultimately, like you just said there, people are sharing their story with you and you get quite an intimate look on people and the lives they lived and their journeys. What are your thoughts on, some of the guests that you've had? You've had such big scale guests, people who are, incredible storytellers, have lived those experiences, people who are quite experienced in the theory of these things that we're learning and teaching along the way. What have been some of the podcast episodes that have stuck out to you the most? And maybe it's a good little suggestion for anyone listening to go ahead and check out those episodes, but more particularly from a selfish standpoint, like what's been the most amazing things for you to learn or the most amazing guests to connect with?
I think that, I had a guy on recently, his name was Ephraim Finch, and he's never been on a podcast before. He's 78 and he was the head of the Jewish morgue, which is called the Hevra Kadisha in Melbourne. Anyway, he was unbelievable. And his story was all about service. And he was telling stories that were deeply sad about the dead bodies that he would look after and clean and make sure that they were ready to be buried. And then the families that were grieving, that was such a big part of his life from there on after. But his stories were full of so much love and they were sprinkled with so much wisdom. And I remember thinking to myself, it's just incredible to see someone so selfless who doesn't even have a social media platform at all, is not getting that kind of feedback that a lot of people get now when they're authors and they're this. Like, he has none of that. And really seeing someone who embodied exactly what I feel like a life of greatness would be. And his interview touched me in such a way that I don't think I've ever stopped thinking about it and him. And then there are other people that, just have these phenomenal stories and they're not even really thought leaders, they're entertainers. I had Kate Langbrook on a couple of times, but the first interview Kate and I did, she really opened up about how she was born into a Jehovah's Witness family and how that was quite challenging. And then she spoke about how her son, who is completely well now, battled leukemia for 4 years or 3.5 years or something. And they thought he was going to die at one stage, and it was just, the story was heart-wrenching, but again, full of so much beauty, the amount of people that helped her along her journey. And I remember because we did it face-to-face, when she left the studio, I just felt like, my God, I am so blessed to be able to tell these stories of these amazing people. And it's, again, a story that I'll never forget. And then you have the amazing thought leaders whose work has been a big part of my life. I think of someone like Joe Dispenza, who I've had on a couple of times, who, I really appreciate his work and all of the research that he has done. Dr. Bruce Lipton is exactly the same. His work is about epigenetics and quantum physics, is unbelievably powerful and interesting. Caroline Mace, she's a medical intuitive, talks a lot about the power of prayer, and I think her work is phenomenal. There are just so many people from all walks of life where their stories have just really hit home, and I just think they're incredible people and honoured to be able to tell their stories.
What makes a podcast guest stand out to you? Because, you spoke of Mr. Finch there and him being a recent one and, not having social media and not being in this world, it's someone that you're probably not going to come across in everyday life. How do you connect with these people, and how do you choose who's the right person for you to sit down and chat with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So 20 years ago, I heard a talk that Ephraim did, and I didn't actually even remember the contents of the conversation, but I remember I really liked it, and I went to this place by myself to listen to this guy speak, because 20 years ago, what we're talking about now was not as popular as what it is now. And I remembered him, and then it obviously lay dormant. And then when I started the podcast, I didn't think of him. And then it was a couple of months ago where I thought, I was thinking of what new guests I should get. And I always like to do a mix. And I thought, maybe I should contact that guy that used to, maybe he still works at the Hevra Kadisha. And then I spoke to a friend who was like, I'm friends with his daughter. It's a small community. And that was easily, we put us in touch, and that worked out perfectly. But the way that I choose my guests, and I think the success of the podcast has always been, is the diversity. So I don't just speak to people in the wellness space. I don't just speak to people about self-improvement. I've had a lot of my friends who are comedians on, like Ed Cavalier and Kate Langbrook and Husey. They've all been on the podcast, as well as Tony Martin. It's basically people whose stories I admire, or whose work I think is really great. And I think having that mixture, my audience gets something different when they're listening. Like, we don't just talk about health, or we don't just talk about business. It's always a mixture of all different people that, as the podcast states, I believe have led a life of greatness. And they don't have to be spiritual. They don't have to do Daniel Riccardo. I mean, he's an amazing Formula One racing driver. It's just incredible stories from great people, basically. And I think that has served me well.
I love that. And, that's probably similar to what I try to do, because I feel like, from a selfish standpoint, I love the diversity, but I know my guests would too. Yeah. Because chatting to different people gives you different perspectives on life. And I feel like it's interesting to hear that a lot of the principles, and I'm sure you can attest to this, a lot of the principles are quite similar, but there's different ways of applying them and looking at them and bringing them into your life. And I found that you don't always relate to somebody's way, but you will quite often find the way that someone else has applied something to their life that works really well for you. Absolutely. And it's quite interesting. I had the other day, I put out like a bit of an anonymous feedback opportunity for some people who listen to the podcast to maybe feel like they could be really safe in giving me some critical feedback on what they'd like to see, or the way that they'd like it to improve. Because I find that when I ask for feedback, people are usually so lovely that they just tell you what you want to hear. And so I thought I'd love to get some feedback off people. And a piece of feedback I got from two people, actually, it was sort of the same sort of thing they'd asked, is they said, do you often agree with everyone who comes on the show? Because it never really feels like you push back at someone on the way that they do things. And I found that really interesting, and I thought about that, and I thought, well, I definitely push back at someone who I don't morally or ethically agree with. Yeah. But I feel like it's to sit there and tell someone that you disagree with the way that they've applied mindfulness to their life, or the way that they like to get the most happiness out of this situation, or the way that they structure their life, I almost feel like feels wrong, because we are all so different.
I totally agree with that. I think, and I have actually, no one's ever said that to me about agreeing with people, but I've thought about the idea, kind of in a sense, of that in my own podcast. And I thought, when you and I mean, I've done a political podcast before, but we're not sitting as politicians, as journos, trying to challenge someone or slip them up, right? So I think that when on my podcast I invite people on, it's about them coming into a safe space, and being in a safe space, then of course I'm going to ask them questions, and some of the questions might be more challenging than others, but I don't want to do it in a way that ever feels disrespectful, because I would hate to come on someone's podcast and they do that to me. But not only that, I've created this space for a beautiful conversation, and for people to open up and tell me stories that sometimes can be confronting or hard for them to do, and I'm going to make sure that they feel as comfortable as possible. And yeah, like you, maybe some people come on and talk about things that I'm not into or anything like that. And yes, if morally I thought it was completely incorrect, sure. But at the same time, I don't think I would have anyone on that was completely morally or unethically different to me anyway. I wouldn't choose someone like that. So yeah, I just think it's a beautiful, loving space that I'm putting people in, and I'm protective of that, and I want to make the person feel as comfortable as possible.
Yeah, it is a challenge. I feel like it's something I'm 26 now. I feel like it's something I'm getting better at with life experiences. I think because my experience was so intense growing up, and my idea of what was important in life was really, I guess it was ingrained in me off the back of living with a chronic illness. And whilst it's been, for me, like my life has been very unique in the way that it's taught me things and it's taught me my values and the way that I want to live, I feel as though it probably made me a little bit stubborn and arrogant on the way that some other people lived. And I found myself quite often confused and a little bit frustrated by the way that people didn't respect their health, or the way that they, almost in some cases, I felt as though they were purposely throwing their life away. It made me frustrated and confused as a young man, because I thought, far out, how do you not appreciate that, and how are you not grateful for how lucky you are to be healthy? And then as I started speaking to more people and hearing people's stories, I started to learn and understand that, well, actually all of our lived experiences are different, and someone's trauma can lead them down this path or lead them into a route of life that is completely not understandable for me because I've not lived that. And it's funny, I feel like the challenge as we get older is to be more open to the fact that we're all different. We all learn and discover who we are in different ways, and we all eventually hopefully find a path that leads to, as you would say, a life of greatness. But it doesn't always look the same.
Yes.
And I think, even leaving back to an experience sort of early at the start of the year, I was invited to meet the now former Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, in Sydney. And we were chatting about a major health development for people with cystic fibrosis and sort of my work in the space. And, it was interesting to gauge people's thoughts on that. Like, a lot of people were quite aggressive in their, oh my God, I can't believe you're meeting with this bloke. And some people were understanding, but I was like, well, I'm not actually saying that I agree with everything politically, but I feel like if we can't have a conversation on trying to improve outcomes for people, and if we can't respect someone else in a conversation and a meeting, do we get anywhere in life?
No, I think, well, that's it. I think you have to be respectful of people, and I mean, people don't like politicians. That's just the number one thing, and you can understand because they're having a big say on the way that they live their life and different things. So there's a lot of ethical reasons behind that. But at the same time, I think that if someone's been respectful to you and, you've got to give them a chance. I mean, it's hard knowing that obviously every situation is different and every individual we're talking about is different. But, there's a line in A Course in Miracles that says, you should see everyone kind of through, like you've met them for the first time. And I think that that's really powerful because it's better to go in with no judgment and fresh pair of eyes and ears and be open to what people have to say. And I think that's the beauty of interviewing, is that when you interview someone, to do it in a way that is non-judgmental allows them to, again, be in that safe space that we were talking about. And then you get really the beauty of their story and the things that they have to share, which is important.
Yeah, it's something that I heard from a very good mate of mine recently, and then it was echoed by my good mate Fernie, Ty, who everyone on the podcast will know. He's often behind the camera or floating about the space somewhere. But then also echoed by the amazing Harry Garside, Olympic boxer and pro boxer. And they were both saying something similar, which I really thought about, and it actually had a bit of a profound impact on the way that I'm approaching everything now. And it was, at some point in your life, everything has been almost like, especially from a young kid, imprinted in who you are by your parents' beliefs, the beliefs of your teachers, the people around you, because you're so impressionable. But at some point in time, you take the power of your education, your understanding, your beliefs into your own hands, and then it's up for you to decide what you believe on certain topics. And you should always be open to that being challenged and changed. And my mate Fernie was saying that at a certain point in time, I almost decided that everything I've ever believed and thought I understood, I don't anymore, and I'm willing to learn again. And that's quite interesting. And taking that approach over the course of the last few weeks I've tried to become very humble and very, not that I wasn't before, but I guess tried to be very humble and very open to learning things again and changing things and challenging my routines and my approaches to life so that I can find out exactly what the perfect and great life looks like for me.
Yeah.
Have you had any guests or any mentors that have come into your life over the course of this journey that have really challenged and changed the way that you thought about or lived in certain areas?
I think one thing on that is that we're always evolving. So I think, like I said, a life of greatness will always change because we're evolving in a certain way, and that evolution changes with age and experience and the wisdom that we're given or just learn from our experiences. And I think that, I don't really have a mentor now. I rather mentor other people, but I've had mentors in my life that have been more so teachers to me more than challenging me. They've given me wisdom that I've then be able to use in my own life. But I'm constantly reading, I'm constantly speaking to people and doing my own research into different areas of self-improvement and, just becoming a better person, which constantly challenge me and make me think in different ways. And I think that, the more that we can learn, the more powerful we become, and that we shouldn't always feel that we need to be right either, like to be in a situation and not need to have to always be heard and know that not everyone needs to think the same way as us, because they're not. That's, as you mentioned, everyone's having their own experience. And when our ego stops and moves to the side, we realize that it's fine for you to think a certain thing and for me to think a certain thing, because that's our experience. And I don't need to convince you for it to be any different. And I think that's a really important thing that we should all take into our lives, that our journey is our journey, and what we make of it is up to us.
Yeah, I love that. You say it so well. Hey, I'd love to dive into, there's 5 questions that I ask every guest on every show. And I always say rapid fire, but I kind of like it when you kind of push the boundaries of that and, dive into it a little bit more, because you've got value to give. And this part of the podcast serves as like a beautiful conclusion to the episode that was, but I also release it separately as like a trailer for anyone who's maybe a little bit more time poor and it feels like they want to get a bit of more of an idea of who you are before they dive into the full episode. So those 5 questions are the same for everyone. And I finished with, I think, the most profound one. The first being, if you could recommend only one book or one podcast to someone listening, what would that be?
Wow. The book would be Deepak Chopra's 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. I think I listened to that book because I listen to all my books on Audible. I think I listen to that once a year, and it doesn't take long. It's not a big book. And it really lays out the principles for success in your life. And I think that it's so wisdom filled. So I highly recommend that book. And then as far as a podcast episode, I would say listen to that Ephraim Finch episode on A Life of Greatness. It's just the most moving episode I think I've ever done. It's full of so much wisdom. And I think for anyone to hear his story will enrich their life so much. So those would be my 2 favorites.
Well, that's definitely going to be my afternoon listen. So I'm looking forward to that. I'll give you some feedback too. I can't wait to hear that. All good, of course. The second would be, what's the one skill that you'd recommend mastering that significantly improved your life?
I think becoming consciously aware of your thoughts, your words. I think the first real bit into becoming spiritual and leading the greatest life is to become conscious, because once we're conscious, it opens us up to a world of so many possibilities. When you live life unconsciously, that's when life happens to you, not for you. So living a conscious life, I think, just makes anyone a better person. And the more that I can do that and just be conscious, like I said, of everything that I do, the more that I will choose the right thing to do and the right words to say and the better way to behave as a person.
I really want to dive into that a little bit there and ruin my rapid fire rule, because you said something there about choosing your words wisely. And I've often thought about this, and actually a podcast guest of yours, who I'm a big fan of, Mo Gordit, made me really aware of this recently. I was listening to his podcast on Stephen Bartlett's channel, Diary of a CEO, And I listened to both of the episodes he was on, and I noticed how carefully, it was this particular morning, I just noticed how carefully he chose his words and how one or two times he corrected his choice of words to be more intentional. And I was thinking, there's something about that felt very humble, in the sense that he wasn't trying to sound smart or he wasn't trying to sound profound, but he understood that the power of language on ourselves individually, the words we speak into existence in our own lives and that form part of our beliefs in our brain, but also the way that those words have impact on others is more profound than we think. And I've tried to be more aware of that over the course of the last few weeks and months of my life, like the things that I say. And I can definitely be a little bit guilty of speaking incredibly kindly and empathetically to the people in my life, but being far less kind and empathetic to myself. And, being more, just being more careful with my words. Have you found that's changed and made huge change and impact in your life personally?
Oh, absolutely. I think the way that I speak to my children, I'm very careful sometimes of how I talk to them and what we talk about. And, you slip up, of course, you're human, everyone does. But I'm very conscious of that. I was having a conversation with someone the other day that I think your listeners and yourself might be really interested in. And it talks about the power of words. When something happens in your life that might be traumatic, so going back to kind of what we previously spoke about, it might be an instance, it might be a diagnosis, but something that was full on. The more we speak about it, if we still have an emotional attachment to it, the more that we're creating those negative feelings in us every day. So, for instance, I'll take a story that I heard about a lady who, this actually comes from Joe Dispenza's book, Becoming Supernatural. He speaks about a lady who basically one day her husband just jumped off a building, and it was really traumatic, because that happened, and she had no idea he was even having mental health issues or anything, and left her with the 3 kids, and she was beside herself. And consequently from that, she got a lot of health issues, and a couple of months would pass and she would tell people the story of what happened. The brain does not know the difference between something that happened yesterday or something that happened 3 years ago. So the more she kept telling the story, the more she was recreating those horrible feelings that she had the moment that she was called to find out that this man her husband had died. And I've seen this in other people as well, that they say have, something negative that happens to them, and they're constantly talking about it, and constantly talking about it when they still have that emotional connection to it means that they're bringing up these negative thoughts and feelings, and they're living in that fight or flight situation, which is obviously then not good for your health. The more that you stop speaking about it, the more you do not put yourself in the situation where your mind is thinking that this thing happened straight away. And yes, there may get to a point where hopefully there is no emotional attachment to that situation anymore, or that encounter that happened, or the diagnosis. And that's when it becomes wisdom. When there's no emotional attachment to that thing is when it becomes wisdom. But as we were saying, the power of words is so unbelievably strong. And I think that we should be very cautious on not only how we use them when we speak to other people, but how we also use them on ourselves, because they can be really effective and really non-effective. If we're always talking about, woe was me, and how was your day? Oh, and then we're talking about the negative things, well, that's when we're going to always focus on that. But when we put the negative things to the side and just speak about the positive things, that's when we start being in that mind frame of positivity and happiness and joy and love. So I think, you look at the word om, and it has such a huge vibration, and they do that in yoga and meditation, because it brings on this current of godly substance to it. So the ancient people from Vedic wisdom and all these other places have known for a long time about the power of words and the vibration that they put into the world. So we need to think about that when we say anything in our life, and especially when we're talking to others, and also talking about ourselves to others.
Far out. That was bloody so spot on. And I think I've heard it from Joe Dispenza before on a podcast, but what you said there about the fact that the brain can't recognize if still emotionally detached, the trauma of past and trauma of present. You know, we often forget that, don't we? And that's probably why when we continue to live these experiences, I think probably that's most presently aware you hear of when people have maybe had like a marriage breakup or a relationship breakdown, and they just want to share their story to get their side across to friends or family, but then they have to keep living through that experience. And you truly, you know, it takes so long to heal, and it takes incredible self-awareness to heal, that I think what you said there is incredibly powerful. And I think also for the people listening, you know, or watching on, speaking about the careful choice of words also doesn't mean that you can't be authentic. You know, I love that the way you share story and you speak is so authentic, Sarah, and you have, you know, like you don't sound alike anyone, or you don't explain things alike anyone else that I've actually sat down with before. There's a real pure 100% of who you are as a human being in that storytelling and the way that you share, but, you know, carefully choosing those words can be something done authentically. So I love that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
No, pleasure. Number 3, the third question. This could also open a can of worms. The challenge that you face that's required the most growth to overcome.
That's a great question. I think for me, it's, you know, something I'm still learning, and I talk quite a bit about with people on the podcast is patience. So it's not like a huge challenge in the sense that it's a health scare or something like that, but it's a challenge in the sense that I feel that, you know, I need to work more on appreciating the journey rather than the outcome. And I think when you're in a field like you and I are in, and you're always striving, or I know I am, you know, to do better and get this and get that. And when you see your career flourishing, you know, you want to be able to just do the most that you can to help so many more people, that it can get to a stage where you're not being as present as maybe you wanted to be, and being in that moment. And again, you know, I mentioned I have children, and giving them the time and the presence that they need, which is important coming from a mother when you're raising kids. I think to me that's just been a struggle that I haven't yet mastered. I'm completely aware of it, but I haven't yet mastered, and something that I feel maybe in life a lot of us need to do. And really, like, it goes back to what we were saying, anything can change in an instant. So we need to make the most out of every day and be present in everything that we do, or try to be, at least be consciously aware of that, and then try to be as present as we can, and really, you know, put as much as we can into every situation that we're in, and rather not wishing the time away. You know, you sometimes, you don't have kids, but when you have young kids, people say, don't wish the time away because they're only young for a short period of time. And then sometimes when you have a baby, as amazing it is, it can be quite hard, because, you know, babies sometimes don't sleep at night. And so, you know, you see yourself wishing away, oh, I can't wait till they're 3 months because then they'll get over this. And then when they're 6 months, they'll be able to do this, and so forth. And I think that people say it for a reason, because life is precious, and those years are precious. All the years of our life are precious. And I think that's something that I'm striving to still achieve, and something I haven't learnt yet, and something I'm faced with every day, and I can definitely work at it.
Yeah, they say patience is a virtue, but bloody hell, it's a challenge, isn't it? And
yes.
I completely relate to what you're saying about, you know, being so driven and wanting to succeed. And I was sitting here the other night at home watching David Letterman's series on Netflix, My Next Guest. I was watching him interview Kevin Durant, and, you know, they're sitting in his home and the Brooklyn Bridge is behind him. And I'm like, oh my God, like, I can't wait until the day that this has reached that point for me where I can connect with, you know, some of the biggest sporting stars in the world and hear their stories on that major stage, and, you know, have this show that's on Netflix and all of that. And then you think, well, actually the journey at the moment is bloody incredible. And that's the exciting thing about the quest of life, right? Is enjoying every moment presently for what it is. But it is such a challenge, because we're, you know, in the world of social media and in the world of TV on demand, and, you know, we're constantly given examples to compare ourselves to. And as I say, comparison is the thief of joy. So I feel like it's a challenge that is definitely not it's definitely not unique to you and I. It's definitely something I think everyone faces in their own unique way.
I think so. And I think social media has enhanced that as well, seeing people putting out what they're doing and you perceiving them in a certain way, even though you have no idea what their life is like, because you're only seeing the positive, because most people don't put the negative on those things. And you create stories in your own mind that don't even exist. So I think if we just focus on ourselves and what we're doing and enjoy that present moment, then that is, as we said, where the real joy will come.
You know, I heard someone the other day, it was actually on the Diary of a CEO, and he was talking about how quite often when we compare ourselves to others, and I thought it was a really good point. He said, when we compare ourselves to others, we go, far out, I wish I had Elon Musk's success and, you know, his status and his business prowess. But he's like, comparison or wanting to be like someone, it's not like this perfect pick your character situation where you get to take Elon Musk's success and couple it with, you know, the looks of Brad Pitt and then piece it together with the mindfulness of Jay Shetty. It's not quite how it works, you know. If you want that, you get all the problems and the challenges that come with them too, and we've all bloody got them. So
that's very true. That's very true.
Such a good point. The fourth question is, what's a daily ritual or routine that's formed a part of your morning or your night time that sets your life up for success?
I think I often get asked this question, and I think for me, prayer has been a big part of my life, and it's not that I'm praying to anyone in particular, but it's just a nice thing that I like to do. So I'll say the prayer of St. Francis in the morning, usually sometimes when I'm in bed, in my head. And then I'll go and I definitely do meditation, and I've done meditation for a very long time, and it's really changed my life. And actually just released 3 new meditations on my website, one for the morning and one for sleep for the nighttime and one for manifestation, because that's always been my favorite. So I'll go into meditation every morning and make sure that I do that. And then I'll exercise a couple of times a week. And I make sure that I always eat, I eat very well. I mean, I, also drink alcohol and things like that, but not a lot. I'm very aware that food is medicine, and I make sure that I eat really nicely prepared meats and protein, and make sure that it's all organic, and I make sure that I eat good quality fruit and vegetables, because again, I know that that our bodies are a temple, and I'm not restrictive in the sense of that I'll only eat certain things, or I'm not vegan or anything like that. But at the same time, I also appreciate good quality food, and I know what that does, not only for the animals, but also for us as humans. So those are the morning kind of rituals that I have, and routines that I've done for many years that have served me really well.
I love that. Sounds like a beautiful balance of things there. And look, the last question, the closing piece of the podcast, which is my favourite. I feel like it's the most profound, and I think it's a beautiful way to conclude every episode, is if you could share one message with the world and encourage them to act on it, what would that message be?
I think if we just realised that, we formed a life where we weren't as judgmental of other people as sometimes we are, I think that is really important. And then when doing that, realise that we're all here, as, the famous quote from Ramdas is to walk each other home. And I think it goes back to that idea of service, that we do the best that we can in the world and help others on their journey, because not only will it enrich our lives, but then it will enrich the lives of other people. And when you're doing that, there is so much joy and love that comes from being like that, that we then, live our own life of greatness. And I feel like we've done what we needed to in this lifetime and lived a really wonderful existence.
I absolutely love that. Sarah Grynberg, you're an absolute pleasure to sit down and have a conversation with. You are, as I said at the start, someone who is very inspiring for the likes of myself in this industry, but also in this world as a human being. And that's the one thing I love. I say it to my guests all the time. It's a real privilege to sit across from someone and appreciate them for their work and what they put out into the world, but to connect as two human beings and then appreciate them for who they are as a human and for their heart is a real privilege. So thank you so much for sharing your time with me. I'm going to make sure that absolutely everywhere that the amazing people who listen to and watch this show can find you is within the show notes. And I will be encouraging everyone to go ahead and listen to A Life of Greatness, as well as diving into plenty of those episodes myself.
Thank you so much. And it's been an absolute pleasure to be on your podcast and have this conversation with you today.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.